I was under contract to Duke's company for 2 years before Gunsmoke came along. In the early days before Gunsmoke, I think I probably got parts because I was tall, because I was tall, big guy.
James Arness, the name forever tied to Marshal Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke, once ruled American television for 2 decades, becoming the Western hero etched into the memory of millions. Yet behind the bright lights of the set, Arness carried wounds that never healed. From the blood-soaked shores of Anzio to the heartbreaking losses within his own home. He walked away from war with legs permanently scarred, enduring a lifetime of physical pain. He reached the pinnacle of fame with Gunsmoke, only to watch his private life collapse piece by piece. A marriage that ended in divorce, a daughter who died young, an ex-wife lost to an overdose, and an adopted son taken by cancer. The towering figure of the screen was, in truth, a man forced to shoulder losses no spotlight could ever erase. The story of James Arness is not just the biography of a star, but the haunting journey of a gentle giant, a man who kept order in a fictional frontier town while spending his real life searching in vain for peace of his own. He stands as proof that sometimes behind an immortal icon, there lies a human being so vulnerable that the world is left stunned when the truth is finally revealed. Early life. James King Arness was born on May 26, 1923, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, into a family of Norwegian and German immigrants. From the very beginning, his life was marked by fragility. His father, Rolf Cirkler Arness, worked as a traveling pharmaceutical salesman and was often absent. His mother, Ruth Dusler, wrote for newspapers to support the family, yet she was powerless against the growing void inside their home. James was raised in the prayers of the Methodist Church, but even faith could not prevent his parents' marriage from crumbling. Their divorce in the early 1940s left the teenage boy not only with a broken home, but with the haunting feeling of being abandoned, cut adrift from the only place he could call home. From a young age, James stood apart. While his classmates still fumbled awkwardly at their desks, he towered above them, eventually reaching 6 feet 7 inches, a height that made him feel perpetually out of place. He attended 3 schools, John Burroughs Elementary, Washburn High, and West High School, but his education was never steady. He frequently missed classes to work, delivering goods for a jeweler, hauling freight at the train station, even heading into the forests of Idaho to cut timber. In the grip of the Great Depression's lingering shadow, young James understood that he had to help keep his family afloat. His childhood was far from idyllic. It was a struggle between longing and reality. The family's financial hardship left deep scars. Every odd job drained his strength and reminded him he was different from other kids his age. While they were free to dream, he was forced to bend his back and earn a living. Yet deep inside, James nurtured a fragile dream: to become a Navy pilot, to rise above the fractured ground of his childhood and find freedom in the skies. The sight of steel birds streaking across the blue horizon stirred in him the hope of escaping loneliness and discovering meaning. But fate was rarely kind. At his medical examination, the dream collapsed in an instant. A few numbers on an eye chart, coupled with his towering height that exceeded regulations, branded James as unfit. No discussion, no second chance, just a cold, dismissive shake of the head. For James, it was more than disappointment. It was a harsh sentence, a reminder that fate seemed to slam the door every time he tried to open one. His dream of flight dissolved into an ache that hovered over him, leaving him to return to the heavy burdens of earth he had never wanted to face. He tried to rescue himself through learning, enrolling at Beloit College in 1942. Within its classrooms, James glimpsed a fragile light, a possible escape from the weight of his past. But the respite was short-lived. World War II erupted, sweeping an entire generation of young men into its firestorm. James was forced to close his books, leave the campus behind, and carry his heavy, unfulfilled youth straight into war, where new wounds would cut deep and stay with him for the rest of his life. For James Arness, childhood and youth were never gentle years. They were marked by absence, by the stigma of being different, and by dreams shattered before they had time to form. This fractured foundation forged him into a silent giant, one who concealed his suffering behind a calm exterior, and later explained why audiences only ever saw a Marshal Dillon who was quiet, stoic, and unyielding. Early career. After leaving Beloit College behind, James Arness no longer had the luxury of dreams. In 1943, he put on a uniform and joined the U.S. Army, serving as an infantryman in the 3rd Division. From a Midwestern boy scarred by the wounds of childhood, James was thrown straight into the furnace of war, where there was no room for innocence, only gunfire, the stench of gunpowder, and the constant weight of fear. At Anzio, Italy, in January 1944, his fate was sealed. As landing craft approached the shore, James, with his towering height of 6 feet 7 inches, was ordered by his commander to jump in first to test the water's depth. It was a moment when he seemed to touch his old dream of flying, but in the cruelest way possible. Not as a pilot soaring in the skies, but as an infantryman plunged into the surf under enemy fire, fully exposed to death. From that instant, the skies of freedom collapsed in his mind, replaced by the cold, merciless sky of war. Machine gun fire rained down as he fought through the surf. James was struck multiple times in the leg and then hit by grenade fragments as he crawled desperately toward the beach. His blood mixed with sand and seawater until his young body nearly gave out. Only his comrades dragging him out of the line of fire saved his life. Barely conscious, James believed he would die on foreign soil at just 20 years old. He was carried through field hospitals, then shipped back to the United States for surgery and rehabilitation. For months, he endured excruciating pain. Doctors grafted bone, fitted steel supports, but the damage was permanent. He would walk with a limp, the pain flaring whenever the weather changed. That pain never left him, even when he later stood tall as a Western hero on the screen. In 1945, James was discharged. He held in his hands glittering decorations, a Bronze Star for bravery, a Purple Heart for his wounds, and the Combat Infantryman Badge for his resilience. Yet in his heart there was only the heaviness of loss. He returned to Minneapolis not as a victor, but as a survivor, a young man who had left part of his body and his youth behind on the battlefields of Italy. From then on, the specter of war became an inescapable part of him. It crippled his body and imprinted itself on his soul, casting a shadow that followed him through later years. Years that would be brilliant on screen, but clouded in private darkness. During the long, immobile months in hospital beds, James wrestled not only with pain, but with an aching void. War had stolen his youth, his dream of becoming a pilot, and even his faith in a clear future. At that moment, it was his younger brother, Peter Graves, who would later become a television star himself, who whispered a lifeline. Try art. Maybe that's the road meant for you. James listened. His first step was as a radio announcer in Minneapolis. His deep, resonant voice, firm yet tinged with melancholy, immediately stood out to listeners. But no matter how much it drew attention, the microphone could not fill the chasm war had left inside him. He knew that if he wanted a true path forward, he had to leave home. With just $100 in his pocket, James took a gamble. He hitchhiked across America toward Hollywood, the land where the silver screen promised new beginnings. There, he enrolled at the Bliss Hayden Theater School, studying every gesture, every line, clinging to the fragile belief that art could heal a ruined soul. In 1947, James landed his first small role in The Farmer's Daughter. Brief as it was, it marked a turning point. The cumbersome Arness was shortened to Arness, simpler, sharper, easier for audiences to remember. It was a quiet but fateful step. From then on, James Arness existed as a new face in Hollywood. His career did not begin in a blaze, but slowly, one halting step at a time, much like the limp he carried from the war. After several forgettable supporting roles, Arness first caught attention in Battleground, 1949, a gritty depiction of the Battle of Bastogne. He was just another weary soldier in the crowd, but his unusual height and stoic expression lingered in the audience's mind. 2 years later, he appeared in The Thing from Another World, 1951. Ironically, the role made him memorable not for his face, but for the heavy makeup concealing it. He became the hulking alien creature that terrified viewers. No one really saw James Arness, yet his sheer physical presence made the monster unforgettable. Then came Hondo, 1953, alongside John Wayne, the biggest Western star of the era. That collaboration changed everything. Wayne, with an eye that had recognized countless talents, immediately saw in Arness not just his size, but an authenticity, a rugged Western spirit few possessed. Using his formidable influence, Wayne not only treated Arness as a colleague, but as a younger brother to protect. He personally recommended Arness to producers, even appearing in promotional reels urging audiences to give this newcomer a chance. From John Wayne's hand, destiny's door opened. James Arness, the wounded soldier who nearly died at Anzio, the actor once hidden behind a monster mask, was given the role of a lifetime. As Marshal Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke, he stepped out of obscurity and into history, forever etched as an immortal Western icon whom no one would ever replace. Career success. In 1955, James Arness stepped into the role that would define him forever, Marshal Matt Dillon in the television series Gunsmoke. The path to Dillon was anything but easy. When CBS first offered the part, he hesitated, even refused, because deep down, Arness feared that his limp from war wounds would betray the image of a Western hero. He worried he would look awkward, that the pain in his every step would show through the camera. That was when John Wayne, who had guided him from the very beginning, intervened. Wayne filmed a special introduction, looking straight into the camera and declaring, "This is James Arness, and he's going to be your hero." That introduction not only launched Gunsmoke, it etched James Arness's name into television history. For the next 2 decades, Gunsmoke became a monument. From 1955 to 1975, the show ran for 20 seasons and 635 episodes. Numbers that would humble any other series. Matt Dillon was no longer just a character. He became the embodiment of justice and order in the Wild West. Viewers grew accustomed to seeing him standing in Dodge City, calm eyes, deep voice, facing down violence and chaos alone, never needing to boast or show force. Behind that powerful exterior was a James Arness who was quiet, conflicted, and intensely private. Off-screen, he was shy, often avoiding reporters to the point of banning them from the set. That reserve led some to mistake him for cold. In truth, Arness was silently enduring the pain of his war injuries. Many scenes were shot after he had been leaning on crutches backstage, forcing himself to walk into frame as if nothing were wrong. At 6 feet 7 inches, his sheer size also created challenges. Female co-stars had to stand on wooden platforms so as not to be dwarfed by the giant. Within the cast, he was a trusted friend. He shared a lifelong bond with Milburn Stone, who played Doc. With Amanda Blake, Miss Kitty, he built a connection that was never fully explained. Rumors of a romance between them were never confirmed. But that ambiguity off-screen only deepened the allure of the Dillon-Kitty relationship on screen. The colossal success of Gunsmoke made James Arness a television superstar. His salary, initially around $1,000 per episode, later climbed into tens of thousands, a fortune at the time. But money was only part of it. More importantly, his name became a household presence across America. On Saturday nights, millions gathered in front of their televisions, waiting for Marshal Dillon to emerge once more, silent, steady, and ready to hold justice in Dodge City. When Gunsmoke ended in 1975, Arness kept the Western spirit alive. He starred as Zeb McCahan in How the West Was Won, as Jim McClane in McClane's Law, and reprised Dillon in 5 television movies up until 1994. For Arness, Dillon was not just a role, it was part of his own flesh and blood. Yet the glow of fame also cast shadows. Arness became almost trapped within Dillon's image, unable to step out from under its vast shadow. But instead of disappearing in silence, he chose to test himself with new projects, both to prove his range and to preserve his bond with audiences. The first turning point was How the West Was Won, 1976 to 1979. As Zeb McCahan, a hardened man leading his family through the harsh frontier, Arness shifted from lawgiver to survivor. If Dillon was the symbol of law, Zeb was the symbol of endurance, a transformation that showed Arness could still command the screen as a different kind of hero. The series never reached the legendary status of Gunsmoke, but in Europe, Zeb McCahan became a phenomenon, making Arness a beloved face for millions of households. In the early 1980s, he returned with McClane's Law, 1981 to 1982. The character Jim McClane, a retired cop forced back into service after his friend's death, reflected much of Arness's own life, a man shaped by war, scars, and loss, yet still relentless in the pursuit of justice. Though the series lasted only 2 seasons, audiences remembered Arness's steadfast gaze, as if his painful past had never stopped him from moving forward. By 1988, Arness took on a new challenge with the remake of Red River. It was especially daunting because the original role had belonged to John Wayne, his closest friend and greatest benefactor. Arness entered the film not to replace Wayne, but to honor him. He played the part with calm, measured intensity, turning the character into something different, reflective, weathered, and quietly burdened, much like Arness himself. In his later years, Arness gradually withdrew from film sets, choosing instead to live quietly with family, but he never disappeared completely. In 2001, he released his autobiography, James Arness, an autobiography. For the first time, audiences heard his own voice, recounting the poverty of his childhood, the blood-soaked days of war, and the private family tragedies he had carried in silence. The book was not glamorous, not embellished, but raw and honest enough to let readers touch the scars he bore. Arness's career and character were honored with lasting tributes. In 1981, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, placed on Vine Street, where millions stop each year to see his name etched in stone. Later, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in Oklahoma and the Santa Clarita Walk of Stars, 2006, affirming his place as a Western icon on television. People magazine in 1989 named him among the 25 greatest television stars of all time, while TV Guide in 1996 ranked Matt Dillon at number 20 among the 50 greatest TV characters. The pinnacle came in 2005 when Arness, at age 82, was named an honorary U.S. Marshal by the federal government, transforming a screen legend into an official title in real life. For Arness, these honors were never just trophies or stars glittering on Hollywood sidewalks. They were proof that across a long, difficult journey, limping from war wounds, carrying the weight of loss, he had still forged a legacy America would bow its head to remember. Behind the scenes, behind the image of the indomitable Marshal Matt Dillon, was a flesh-and-blood James Arness, carrying wounds that never truly healed. The bullets and shrapnel from Anzio left him with legs that ached for the rest of his life, every step a reminder of a brutal past. On the Gunsmoke set, he often masked his limp by choosing careful camera angles or standing still longer than his co-stars. To endure the relentless pain, Arness relied on painkillers, a burden the audience never glimpsed behind Dillon's unshakable presence. Off-screen, Arness was the opposite of his on-screen persona. Shy and publicity-averse, he despised the spotlight, especially the press. More than once, he flatly banned reporters from Gunsmoke's set, earning a reputation for being cold and unapproachable. In reality, Arness was simply guarding the little privacy he had left. During the 2 decades Gunsmoke dominated television, Arness's enormous fame made him a magnet for speculation. The less he revealed about his personal life, the more the public and press invented stories around him. One of the most persistent rumors involved his relationship with Amanda Blake, who played Miss Kitty. On screen, their glances often carried a weight that seemed to go beyond friendship, at once tense and hesitant, as if something unspoken lingered between them. Audiences who had watched the ambiguous bond between Dillon and Kitty unfold over hundreds of episodes began to believe that the silence was not just scripted, but a reflection of a secret off-screen romance. Though neither Arness nor Blake ever confirmed it, their very denials only deepened the conviction that something was being concealed behind the camera. Arness was also caught in rumors of rivalry. For years, tabloids claimed he and Clint Walker, the star of Cheyenne, were bitter enemies, locked in competition for the title of Western hero on television. The supposed ratings battle between the two shows was painted as personal hostility. With Milburn Stone, who played Doc, his relationship had its own ups and downs. At times, they clashed, but over the years, shared struggles and mutual respect drew them close. In the end, they forged a lasting friendship, something Arness himself would later speak of with genuine gratitude. Even his family was not spared from gossip. Some claimed James Arness resented his younger brother, Peter Graves, star of Mission Impossible. The truth was entirely different. Arness's silence and reclusive nature were misinterpreted. In reality, the brothers supported one another, even working together. Peter Graves directed an episode of Gunsmoke in 1955, proof that their bond was built on trust and quiet respect, far from the feuds the public imagined. All of it, his war wounds, his guarded nature, the constant swirl of rumors, created a James Arness very different from the fearless Dillon on screen. A man living in the shadows of himself, striving for calm while carrying wounds, both physical and emotional, that never truly faded. Personal life: James Arness never imagined he would become an actor, and even less that his life would take a dramatic turn when he walked into the Pasadena Community Playhouse in the late 1940s. There, during rehearsals for the play Candida, he met Virginia Chapman, a young actress full of ambition. Virginia carried a delicate beauty and a fierce passion for the stage, while James was a towering, shy man, just beginning to test the waters of acting. Their encounter quickly blossomed into a passionate romance. They married in 1948 when James was still struggling to find his footing in the industry. The marriage began modestly but warmly. James adopted Craig, Virginia's son from a previous relationship, as his own. And soon, 2 more children were born: Jenny Lee, 1950, and Rolf, 1952. In those years, the Arness family lived in a small house where children's laughter and hopes for the future seemed enough to mend all hardships. For a war veteran still scarred by battle wounds, James found in family both comfort and strength to carry on. But happiness did not last, as James began to build his reputation with early roles, and then skyrocketed to fame as Marshal Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke, 1955. The glow of stardom became a double-edged sword. Work consumed him. Endless shooting days, pressure from producers, and the burden of being one of the most recognized television stars in America. Virginia, meanwhile, struggled with her own career and gradually felt abandoned in the very home she once believed was her sanctuary. The distance widened. James, reserved by nature, rarely showed emotions and withdrew further into work. Virginia sank into loneliness, turning to alcohol and pills for relief. Small arguments grew into bitter fights, then into cold silence. By the early 1960s, the seemingly solid marriage had collapsed. In 1963, they divorced. Unexpectedly, James won custody of all 3 children, a rare ruling at the time, showing his determination to hold on to family even without a marriage. After the divorce, James poured himself into raising his children, but more tragedies struck with devastating force. In 1975, his daughter Jenny Lee died of a drug overdose at the age of 25. The shock shattered him. Those close to Arness later revealed that he had fallen into such despair that he considered ending his own life, with the very revolver that symbolized Marshal Dillon's justice on screen. The contrast was agonizing. On television, he was the unbreakable hero, but off-screen, he was a broken father, crushed by an irreparable loss. Before he could recover from Jenny's death, tragedy returned. In 1977, Virginia Chapman, his first wife, the woman who had walked with him through his early struggles, also died from an overdose. Though they had been divorced for nearly 2 decades, Virginia was inseparable from his life story. The mother of his children, the witness to his turbulent youth. Her death tore apart what little thread still tied him to the memory of a whole family. For James, it was not just the passing of an ex-wife, but a cruel reminder of his helplessness against the darkness that had consumed both his daughter and the woman he once loved. James tried to focus his love on his two surviving sons. He proudly watched Rolfe rise to become the world surfing champion in 1970, relieved that his son had built a life untouched by the family's tragedies. Yet fate denied him lasting solace. In 2004, Craig, the adopted son he had embraced as his own, the boy he once cradled as the promise of a new beginning, died of cancer. For James, it was another wound as deep as the first, reopening the pain he had never been able to bury. His first marriage was thus both the most beautiful beginning and the deepest scar of his life. It brought him moments of warmth, but also left him with a chain of haunting tragedies: the loss of a wife, a daughter, and an adopted son. These losses shaped James into a man who became ever more private, retreating from the press and keeping his grief locked inside. And that is why, behind the proud Marshal Dillon, audiences could always sense the shadow of a James Arness, silent, solitary, and forever burdened by the wounds of a father who could never escape his pain. After years of being hounded by rumors and having his private life torn apart by family tragedies, James Arness finally found a quiet harbor away from the spotlight. The woman who entered his life at that time was Janet Surtees, a face completely unfamiliar to Hollywood. Their meeting happened on an ordinary evening. Janet worked at a fashion shop owned by the wife of one of Arness's colleagues. It was there that James, the towering, reserved man with a permanent sadness etched into his face, first encountered Janet, a woman with a gentle yet decisive spirit. Their love did not arrive with noise or drama. Unlike the short-lived, exhausting relationships of his past, Janet brought Arness a rare sense of peace. She was not dazzled by the fame of Gunsmoke, nor overly curious about the wounds he carried from his past. That quiet respect allowed James to open up. They dated in silence, away from the media, enjoying simple moments, walks, long talks, or just sitting together in stillness by the ocean. In 1978, James Arness and Janet Surtees married. This marriage was unlike the life he had known before. No chaos, no public breakdowns. Janet became not only his steadfast partner, but also a second mother to the children from his first marriage. Though he carried the heavy legacy of sorrow, the suicide of his daughter Jenny, the overdose death of Virginia Chapman, and later, Craig's battle with cancer, James found in Janet a safe haven to begin again. Their family was not without challenges. Arness lived with the shadows of war, his physical and emotional wounds often drawing him into himself. There were times when Janet had to endure his heavy silences, when he withdrew into memories too painful to share, or when grief over his daughter resurfaced without warning. But instead of reproach, she chose to remain beside him, listening when he was ready and staying silent when he needed space. It was this quiet presence that, for the first time in years, made James feel he was no longer alone in his large, empty home. They had no children together, yet their family felt complete in another way. Janet embraced James's children as her own, creating a home he once believed he would never have again. Together, they tended to their house in Brentwood, Los Angeles, a place shielded from reporters, filled only with gardens, a pool, and quiet afternoons. It became the space where James spent his final years, with Janet always by his side. Through more than 3 decades of marriage, Janet Surtees was not only a wife, but also the keeper of James Arness's secrets and sorrows. She saw him transform from the unyielding hero of the screen to an aging, limping man who nonetheless cherished every remaining day. When James passed away in 2011, Janet was there, quietly by his side. To the public, Arness would forever be Marshal Dillon. But to Janet, he was simply the man who had spent a lifetime searching for peace and who, at last, had found it in her love. Philanthropy and lifestyle. Though James Arness spent his life quietly, avoiding the spotlight, he left behind an impressive estate. At the time of his death in 2011, his net worth was estimated at around $8 million, a figure that reflected the enduring success of Gunsmoke and his television projects that spanned nearly half a century. But behind the numbers was the story of a man constantly seeking balance between fame and peace. Perhaps Arness's most valuable possessions were not paychecks or contracts, but two homes, each telling a different chapter of his life. In Brentwood, Los Angeles, he owned a modest one-story house of about 2,435 square feet. Unlike the lavish mansions of many Hollywood stars, it was simple: a lush green garden, a small pool, and windows that opened onto calm skies. It was here that he lived with Janet Surtees for more than 3 decades, the place he chose to retreat from the noise of Hollywood and find tranquility after years marked by loss. This Brentwood home was more than just a house. It was the final fortress of a man weary of the stage lights. By contrast, in Minneapolis, his hometown, Arness once owned a grand 8,000-square-foot mansion. With 8 bedrooms, multiple fireplaces, a billiards room for leisure, and even a secret library where he could read in solitude, the home once stood as a symbol of his soaring success. Yet, after his death, the mansion was left abandoned, slowly falling into decay, becoming a somber reminder of the fading glow of stardom, much like his life itself, once brilliant, then quietly dimmed. If Arness was private about his personal life, he was even more discreet in charity. He disliked fanfare, never sought public recognition, and let his actions speak for themselves. In 1968, he made a surprising decision: donating a 1,400-acre ranch, worth around $2 million, to the Brandeis Bardin Institute, now part of American Jewish University. That ranch, with its rolling hills and open plains, had once been a place of peace for him. Yet he chose to give it away, turning it into a center for education and culture. It was a gesture both generous and deeply philosophical. He did not want to hoard wealth, but to see it serve the community. He also quietly supported veterans through the American Legion as a way of honoring the comrades who had fallen at Anzio. In addition, he contributed to children's charities, cancer research, and animal protection efforts. He never sought credit. He simply believed doing the right thing was his duty. The Brentwood home held his final peaceful years, while the vast Minneapolis mansion became a haunting monument to fading fame. Between these two worlds, it was his silent acts of giving, donating a ranch for future generations, supporting veterans, children, cancer patients, and even animals, that formed his deepest legacy. There, one sees not just a Western star on screen, but a true human being, with a kind heart that continued to shine long after he stepped away from the lights. Final years. In his twilight years, James Arness chose a life of simplicity and seclusion. After the lights of Gunsmoke faded, he withdrew from Hollywood, never chasing after renewed fame or glamorous comebacks. At his one-story home in Brentwood, he lived quietly with Janet Surtees, the wife who had stood by him for more than 3 decades. The green garden and small pool became his sanctuary, a place of peace in stark contrast to the lingering physical pain from his war wounds and the emotional scars left by family tragedies. From time to time, the press would still refer to him as the last Western hero, but Arness rarely appeared in public. He preferred spending his days in nature, flying small planes for leisure, or sitting for hours by the ocean. To outsiders, such a life might have seemed lonely, but for Arness, it was the only way to preserve balance, a fragile balance between painful memories and the longing for peace. On June 3rd, 2011, James Arness took his final breath at his Brentwood home at the age of 88. He passed away quietly, without flashing cameras or media commotion, with only Janet at his side. But before closing the book of his life, he left behind a brief letter, published on his official website. In those final words, Arness thanked his family, friends, colleagues, and fans, the ones who had accompanied him on his long journey. He wrote that he had lived a wonderful life and had been blessed with so much love and so many wonderful people. It was a farewell neither mournful nor ostentatious. It reflected exactly who he was, reserved yet profound, strong yet deeply human. And in that moment, television's great Western hero stepped off his final stage, leaving behind a silence that reminded the world. Sometimes, greatness lies in humility and in the quietest peace. Legacy and influence. James Arness did not just leave behind a role, he left behind an entire era. Through Gunsmoke, he embodied Marshal Matt Dillon for 2 decades, setting the standard for the Western hero in American television like none before him. Dillon was not only a lawman defending justice, but also a symbol of calm, integrity, and moral strength, the very values post-war America longed to see reflected in a guiding figure. That influence extended far beyond the screen. For 20 seasons, millions of American families gathered each week to watch Gunsmoke. The tales of Dodge City and Arness's Dillon became collective memory, woven into the fabric of 20th century American popular culture. Many critics dubbed him the John Wayne of television, not for cinematic grandeur, but for his ability to shape an entire worldview through the small screen. Beloved by audiences, Arness was also formally recognized with countless honors: a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 1981, induction into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, and in 2005, the rare distinction of being named an honorary U.S. Marshal, one of the few times a fictional character was honored by the very institution it portrayed. It proved that Dillon had become more than a character. He was a living symbol of an entire profession. Arness's influence reached the next generation as well. How the West Was Won carried his image to Europe, where viewers embraced Zeb McCahan with equal passion. Younger Western actors, from Sam Elliott to Tom Selleck, admitted they grew up watching Dillon and learned how to craft characters through Arness's blend of simplicity and strength. But his deepest legacy was not in awards or titles. It was in how James Arness touched the hearts of viewers. He made audiences believe that justice could be real, that kindness and resolve could survive even in a chaotic world. And when his personal life was revealed, with all its losses and tragedies, his portrayal of Dillon felt even more authentic, for behind the symbol stood a man who had endured and still remained standing. Today, when people remember James Arness, they recall not only Gunsmoke as a legendary series, but also him as a cultural icon, a gentle giant who turned private pain into strength and left behind a legacy forever etched into television history and the hearts of his audience. There are people who depart quietly, yet leave behind a void that can never be filled. James Arness was one of them. He left no explanations, sought no resounding bells of tribute. What remains is a heavy silence, one that forces us to search for answers in the image of a man who spent his life fleeing the spotlight, yet still lingers in the cultural memory of America. And perhaps it was precisely this mystery that made him immortal. In a noisy Hollywood, the quieter a figure was, the more hauntingly unforgettable he became. The final truth is something only Arness carried to his grave, leaving us with fragments of a story that will never completely close. And what about you? When you think of James Arness, what stands out most? The stoic marshal standing firm in the stormy West, or the solitary man who found peace only in his final years? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so we can continue uncovering the tragic and inspiring life stories of legends like him.